So you've got a Nikon Z camera and you are ready to shoot some amazing cinematic footage. So you can pay Nikon 200 bucks to upgrade the firmware in your camera so you can shoot RAW. You gotta cover the shipping and handling on top of that, of course. In addition, you'll need high capacity cards so you can capture the footage, super high capacity hard drives in order to store the footage, and maybe a new computer just to handle the footage. Sounds like us resource conscious creators might be out of luck. Nope. You can actually create a simulated log profile inside your Z camera for free. It's easy. It takes like 10 seconds. You don't have to download anything or install anything. And while a simulated log format isn't quite true log, it gets you like 90% of the way there, giving you an increased dynamic range and a lot more control and room for creativity when it comes to color grading. Let me show you.
And setting it up is actually really simple. So let me just walk you through that real quick. Navigate to the movie shooting menu, and then right below white balance, which is one little section down from the top of the menu, at the top of that section, you'll see set picture control, and below that one, manage picture control. So select manage picture control. Now there's room on the camera to create a whole bunch of different picture controls. But in order to create a new one, you're either going to need to edit an existing one or copy it to have some settings to start with. So in this case, we're going to select save/edit, and we need to choose an existing picture control to use as a base from which we can edit.
Theoretically, it doesn't matter what profile you start with, but I would recommend starting with a flat profile because I have found that even when you set all the settings to the same, that different base profiles do affect your final color profile.
Moving down into sharpening, we'll move that all the way down to -3. Mid-range sharpening, bring that all the way down to -5. We're actually going to bring clarity back up and make sure that clarity is at 0. So it's not doing anything, not messing with the clarity. When I was creating this profile and testing things out, I had actually set clarity all the way to 0. And what that does is it actually creates like a soft focus effect that maybe not even possible to correct in the edit 100%. So kind of like you might have had in the old film days when they put a soft filter on women's skin on the lens. In this case, if we leave it at 0, it means it's not messing with the image, and it's going to give us the closest to a log unfiltered output that we can get, and that's what we want. Contrast, move that all the way down to -3, because we don't want the camera to be adding contrast. We want to add that manually and decide where we actually want that on the image, whether that's in the highlights or the shadows and how much. Because when the camera decides where that contrast is, that reduces our ability to manipulate that contrast in post when we have the luxury of a slower environment where we can analyze the curves and analyze the waveforms and get the perfect amount of exposure that's giving us a bright image, but not overexposing where we don't want to or underexposing and crushing things and removing details we don't want removed, right? Brightness, we want to leave brightness as is. Now, sometimes in log or simulated log color profiles like this, you will have people that might boost it just a little bit in order to help protect their shadows, but that's adding a filter that's artificially increasing the brightness of your image. That's going to affect your highlights. It's not really going to give you anything too much in your shadows. I would leave that at 0 just so that we're not messing with anything there at all. And then saturation, I like to bring that all the way down to -3. If you're finding that you're just not able to get the colors you want out of your image when you're grading it later, you could bump that up to -2. But in most cases, you want that down at -3. And then hue is the last option on there. Don't mess with that one either. That one will kind of skew your colors. This isn't an Instagram filter. This is trying to have the camera do as little processing, giving us as much and as close to a raw image as possible in a compressed format like H.264. So once we've done that, we can hit OK. And then we are presented with a menu of slots. Looks like we can have 9 different custom image profiles, and you can pick one and then you can name it. So you can name it something like Z space L. Oh, this is like bringing back typing on old Nintendo 64 consoles, LOG. And then we hit OK. And there we have it. We have our custom picture control set up. So how do we use it? Let's take a look.
And using this setup is actually really simple. The main obstacle to overcome is that when you're shooting in a log or a simulated log like this, that everything looks flat, and so it can be a little hard sometimes to tell what you're doing. And so I've set up my custom menu, the one where you hit the I button, so that the profiles are in there, and then I can just use my rotation command dial to switch between flat and say a landscape or a portrait profile. So when I'm setting up a shot, I can really quickly hit the I button and then using the command dial, rotate over to landscape or portrait, see what I'm getting, and then really quickly flip back to flat really fast without having to navigate through a whole bunch of menus. And I can then actually see what a graded version of that might look like. The other thing I rely heavily on is by hitting the display button until I see the histogram, so I can see what the actual exposure of my image is and making sure that nothing's clipping or nothing's getting underexposed that shouldn't, or that my ratios aren't really way off. And while there isn't a lot of sun out here today, snow is notorious for causing exposure problems, especially when you're shooting against something dark. You probably see it on this little action cam right now, where the camera is really struggling to know, does it expose from my black jacket or the white snow or the black camera, and I'm sure I look terrible. But with this flat profile and then using the histogram and then switching quickly back and forth just for reference on that portrait mode, we can really quickly see where we want to set that exposure and if we can save some of that detail in that snow or in that sky or in those shadows. Okay, so we got our footage into the computer and it looks like garbage. So how do we correct that? So in Davinci Resolve, we're in the color tab. So when you're using a log profile, you're going to start noticing that oftentimes the exposure mountains start after the edges of your image. And so the first thing you're going to do is just bring the black up to just about where your mountains start on the left side. And this is a matter of taste a little bit. If you want a little bit more crushed blacks, you can bring them in just a little bit more after the mountain starts or a little bit before. And you're going to do the same on the whites. You're going to bring that in left until you have reached where the mountain begins on the highlight side, which is the right side of your curves editor. You can also do this in the color wheels using lift and gain, but I really do prefer to use the curves for this kind of stuff. So already you can see that this footage is looking way better. If we add a simple S-curve to our footage, then we start getting contrast in the middle where it really counts. You're already starting to see the color come back into the image. So at this point, you're going to have to play around a little bit, especially when it comes to skin tones, just to try and get those skin tones where you want them and where that contrast is in the skin tones to feel natural. Oftentimes, I can feel like I can quickly get it close in my curves, but then if I start playing with it too much, it starts messing up. So then I will go into my color wheels section here and just up the contrast a little bit. And that often does the trick. Another thing you can do so that you're not guessing all the time as to what you're working on is you can use the qualifier and say click on the skin tones and get a really accurate idea of where that skin tone point is. And that can be really helpful with getting your skin contrast right. And if things are blowing out or crushing and you're not sure why that's happening in your curve editor, you can use that qualifier again to get an idea what section needs to just be pulled down or raised up and just bump it just a little bit to get your exposure right. Now, 90% of the time, if you get the contrast right, you don't have to add saturation back into the image. It naturally happens. But occasionally, I just have to pull up the saturation like 5 or maybe up to 60 just to get that skin tone and that color back in the image the way I want it to be. It gives you so much more control than you would have if you had shot on a standard color profile and that stuff had already been baked in. You can do a lot more color grading, a lot more tweaking, a lot more fine tuning, and get the image just the way you like it. Now, a lot of people talk about log footage as if the purpose of it is just in case you make mistakes, but it's not really the main purpose. I mean, it's useful. It's better, though, to get the image right in camera. But the reality is, we do all make mistakes. There's been projects that this log profile has saved the image because we had something in the settings wrong or the light changed midway through the shot, and it just gave us that little bit more of dynamic range to play around with. But the real advantage of it is that you can tweak the highlights and the darks to exactly where you want them, and you have more room to be creative and make the image what you want it to be. But if the lighting in your image looks meh, it's not going to look cinematic no matter what you do with your color grade. So you need to light your image right. So if you really want to take your videos to the next level, that's the video for you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time.